I never wanted to be a monster. That's what people don't understand when they see the tattoos crawling up my neck, the scars mapping out every bad decision I ever made across my knuckles and forearms. They see Alexi the Dropout Saenz, and they think I was born this way, like evil just runs in the blood or something. But I wasn't always this. I was a kid once, just like any other kid in Brentwood, trying to make it through another day without getting my ass kicked or my lunch money stolen. Long Island wasn't supposed to be like this. My parents came here from El Salvador thinking they were bringing us to paradise, somewhere safe, somewhere clean, where their kids could grow up without hearing gunshots at night. They worked 2 jobs each, breaking their backs, so we could have what they never did. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't see through all that hope and exhaustion, was that Long Island had its own kind of war waiting for us. Middle school was when everything started falling apart. I was small for my age, quiet. The kind of kid who kept his head down and tried not to make waves. But that didn't matter. The other kids could smell weakness like blood in the water. They'd corner me in the bathrooms, steal my backpack, push me around in the hallways while teachers looked the other way. It wasn't just bullying. It was targeted, systematic, like they'd marked me from day one as someone they could destroy. The worst part wasn't even the physical stuff. It was the isolation, the feeling that nobody gave a damn whether I lived or died. I'd come home with bruises and my mother would cry, asking me why I couldn't just be normal, why I couldn't just fit in like the other kids. She didn't get it. There was no fitting in when you were prey. And I was prey every single day. By the time I turned 14, I'd stopped going to classes altogether. I'd show up to school just long enough to mark attendance, then I'd disappear. I'd spend my days walking around Brentwood, hanging out near the train station, anywhere but those hallways that felt like a prison. My grades were in the toilet. Not because I was stupid, but because I couldn't focus on algebra when I was worried about getting jumped between periods. The school didn't care. They were happy to have one less problem kid cluttering up their statistics. My parents were furious but helpless. They threatened to send me back to El Salvador, as if that would fix anything. As if I'd survive a week in a country I barely remembered. That's when I started noticing them. The guys with the tattoos, the ones who moved through the streets like they owned them. MS-13, La Mara Salvatrucha. The name alone made people cross the street. I didn't go looking for MS-13. They found me. I was sitting outside a bodega one afternoon, just killing time, when 3 of them rolled up. They knew my face, knew I was Salvadoran, knew I was alone. One of them, a guy they called Smiley because of the scar that ran from his ear to his mouth, sat down next to me and asked if I was tired of being a victim. He said it just like that, calm and casual, like he was offering me a cigarette. He told me that out here, you were either a hunter or prey, and if I kept going the way I was going, I'd end up in a ditch before I turned 16. He wasn't threatening me. He was stating facts. And the thing is, I knew he was right. I'd felt it coming for months. That inevitable moment when the bullying would cross the line into something worse, something permanent. So when Smiley told me they could protect me, that they could make me strong, I didn't think twice. I said yes. Joining wasn't some grand ceremony like you see in movies. It was brutal and simple. They call it being jumped in, and it means exactly what it sounds like. 5 members surrounded me in an alley behind a warehouse and beat me for 13 seconds, 1 second for each letter in MS-13. They didn't hold back. Fists, boots, elbows, everything came at me in a blur of pain and fury. I thought I was going to die. I wanted to curl up and beg them to stop. But something inside me, some animal instinct, kept me on my feet. When it was over, I was bleeding from my nose and mouth, my ribs screaming with every breath. But I was standing. Smiley helped me up, grinned, and said I was a homeboy now. Just like that, I had a family. Just like that, I belonged. And for the first time in years, I felt safe. The protection was real. Oi. Word spread fast that I was MS-13 now, and suddenly the kids who used to torment me wouldn't even make eye contact. I walked through the same hallways that used to feel like minefields, and nobody touched me. Nobody even looked at me wrong. It was intoxicating. That feeling of power, of finally being the one people feared instead of the one cowering in corners. I started wearing the colors, throwing the signs, talking the talk. My parents noticed the change, and it broke them. My mother cried every night, begging me to leave the gang, telling me I was throwing my life away. My father just stopped talking to me altogether, like I'd already died and he was mourning someone who didn't exist anymore, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I mattered. I was someone, and I wasn't going back to being nobody ever again. The first time I hurt someone, I told myself it was necessary. A guy from a rival set, some punk from the Bloods who'd been talking shit about Lamara, needed to be taught a lesson. Smiley handed me a bat and told me to handle it. We cornered the guy outside a convenience store in central Islip, 3 of us against 1 of him. I remember the sound the bat made when it connected with his ribs, that hollow crack that echoed in my chest. He went down screaming, and we didn't stop. We kept hitting him until he stopped moving, until the pavement was slick with blood. When it was over, I was shaking so hard I could barely stand, but Smiley clapped me on the back and said I'd done good, that I was a real soldier now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the guy's face, the terror in his eyes, the way his body crumpled, but by morning, I'd convinced myself it was just part of the life. This was survival. This was war. After that, it got easier. That's the thing nobody tells you about violence. How quickly you can get used to it, how fast it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like routine. I became one of Smiley's go-to guys for enforcement. When someone owed money and didn't pay, I collected. When someone disrespected the clique, I delivered the message. I was good at it, efficient, and brutal. And that reputation spread. People started calling me the Dropout, a name that started as an insult but became a badge of honor. I wore it proudly. By 16, I dropped out of school officially, not that anyone was surprised. School was for kids with futures, and I'd already chosen my path. My world shrank to a few square miles of Long Island territory, the streets and parks and corners that belonged to us. Everything outside that was enemy territory, and everyone inside it was either family or a future corpse. The money started coming in. We ran everything in Brentwood and parts of central Islip, from extortion to drug distribution to human trafficking. I didn't ask questions about where the product came from or where the girls were going. That wasn't my job. My job was to make sure nobody interfered with the business, and I was damn good at it. I started making more in a week than my parents made in a month, and I threw money at them like that would fix the disappointment in their eyes. My mother took it because she was desperate, because the bills were piling up and my father's back was giving out from years of construction work. But she wouldn't look at me when I handed her the cash. She knew where it came from. She knew what I was becoming. And I think, in some way, she was mourning me even while I was still alive. The violence escalated. It always does. What started as fistfights and beatings turned into stabbings, shootings, executions. MS-13 wasn't just about territory anymore. It was about sending messages, about making examples out of people who stepped out of line. I was there when we killed a guy who'd snitched to the cops, dragged him out to the woods near Pilgrim State Hospital and put 3 bullets in the back of his head. I was there when we macheted a rival gang member in broad daylight, left him bleeding out in a parking lot while people screamed and ran. Each time, I told myself it was necessary, that it was us or them, that this was the only way to survive. But deep down in the part of me I tried to bury, I knew I was lying. This wasn't survival anymore. This was slaughter. And I was one of the butchers. By the time I turned 18, I'd been arrested twice, both times for assault. The first time I got off with probation because they couldn't prove anything. The second time I did 6 months in county, and that's where I really learned what MS-13 was capable of. Inside, the gang ran everything. They controlled the drugs, the weapons, the protection rackets. If you weren't MS-13, you were either paying tribute or you were dead. I saw men get shanked in the showers over a pack of cigarettes. Watched guards turn blind eyes to beatings because they were on the payroll. Prison wasn't punishment for us. It was networking. I came out harder, colder, more connected than ever. My reputation on the streets had grown while I was inside, and when I got out, I was handed more responsibility. Smiley had moved up the chain, and he wanted me running enforcement for the entire Brentwood territory. I was 19 years old, and I had 50 guys under me, all of them ready to kill or die on my word. The power was addictive. I walked through Brentwood like a king, and people treated me like one. Shopkeepers gave me free food. Girls wanted to be seen with me. Rival gangs gave our territory a wide berth. I bought myself a car, a used BMW that I kept spotless, and I drove around blasting music like I owned the whole damn island. My parents had moved out by then, relocated to somewhere in New Jersey where my younger brother could grow up away from my shadow. My mother left me a note saying she loved me, but couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore. I burned it. I told myself I didn't need them, that my real family was the clique, the homeboys who had my back no matter what. But late at night, when I was alone in my apartment counting money and cleaning guns, I felt it, that hollow ache in my chest that no amount of power or respect could fill. The turning point came during a war with the Latin Kings. They'd been moving in on our territory, trying to set up shop in Central Islip, and we couldn't let that slide. What started as a few skirmishes turned into an all-out bloodbath. We hit their spots, they hit ours. Bodies started piling up on both sides. The cops were all over us, but we were too deep in to back down. One night, we got word that the Kings were planning a major move, a hit on one of our safe houses. Smiley called for a preemptive strike. He wanted me to lead it. We rolled up 6 deep to a house in Wyandanch, where we knew their shot caller was staying. The plan was simple: kick in the door, kill everyone inside, send a message that MS-13 doesn't get pushed around. But when we got inside, it wasn't just gangbangers. There was a woman there, a kid maybe 8 or 9 years old, hiding behind a couch. I saw them and everything stopped. I'd killed men before, plenty of them, and I'd learned to live with it. But this was different. This was a line I'd never crossed, a place even I couldn't justify going. The woman was screaming, begging us not to hurt her son, and the kid was crying, his whole body shaking with terror. My guys were looking at me, waiting for orders, and I just stood there frozen. Smiley wasn't with us that night. It was my call to make. One of the guys, a kid named Flacco, raised his gun at the woman, and I heard myself yell for him to stop. I told everyone to back out, that we'd hit them another time, that this wasn't the move. Some of them listened. Flacco didn't. He pulled the trigger and the woman dropped. The kid's screaming still echoes in my head, this high-pitched wail that cut through everything. We left them there, the woman bleeding out and the kid kneeling beside her. And I knew right then that I'd crossed a point of no return. After that night, everything changed. Word got back to Smiley about what happened, about how I'd hesitated, about how I'd tried to stop it. He pulled me aside and told me I was getting soft, that the streets would eat me alive if I didn't toughen up, but I couldn't unhear that kid screaming. I couldn't unsee his mother's body on the floor. I started having nightmares, waking up in cold sweats, seeing their faces every time I closed my eyes. I tried to push through it, told myself it was just part of the game, but something inside me had broken. I started drinking more, popping pills to sleep, anything to quiet the noise in my head. My guys noticed. The respect started to waver. In MS-13, weakness is a death sentence, and I was showing cracks. The paranoia set in. I started seeing enemies everywhere, even among my own clique. Every conversation felt like a test, every look like a threat. I knew how this worked. I'd seen it happen to others. Once you showed weakness, once you became a liability, you got dealt with. I'd been the one doing the dealing for years. Now I was terrified I'd be on the receiving end. I thought about running, about disappearing somewhere MS-13 couldn't reach me, but I knew that was impossible. The gang had reach everywhere, from Long Island to El Salvador to federal prisons across the country. There was no escaping. The only way out was death, either theirs or mine. I started carrying 2 guns everywhere, sleeping with one under my pillow, jumping at every shadow. I was falling apart and everyone could see it. It came to a head 6 months later. Smiley called a meeting, said we needed to discuss territory expansion. When I showed up, there were too many people there. Guys I didn't know, faces from other cliques. My instincts screamed at me to run, but pride and stupidity kept me rooted. Smiley started talking about loyalty, about commitment, about what happens to soldiers who forget where they came from. He was talking about me. I saw Flacco move before he even reached for his weapon, and that split second of awareness saved my life. I pulled my gun and fired, hitting him in the chest before he could get a shot off. Then everything exploded. Bullets flew, people dove for cover, and I ran like hell. I took 2 rounds, one in the shoulder and one that grazed my ribs, but adrenaline kept me moving. I made it to my car and drove until my vision started blurring from blood loss. I ended up at a hospital in Nassau County. far enough away that I didn't think MS-13 would find me immediately. I told the doctors I'd been mugged, and they were too busy saving my life to ask questions. The cops came anyway. They always do when someone shows up with gunshot wounds. I didn't say anything, just gave them a fake name and kept my mouth shut. But lying in that hospital bed, doped up on morphine and wrapped in bandages, I realized something. I was done. Not because I'd found God or suddenly grew a conscience, but because I was tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of living in constant fear, tired of being a monster. I'd spent 5 years building a reputation as Long Island's worst nightmare, and all it had gotten me was a bullet in the shoulder and a target on my back that would never go away. When I got out of the hospital, I didn't go back to Brentwood. I didn't go back to my apartment or any of the spots I used to run. I knew MS-13 would be looking for me, and I knew what they'd do when they found me. Instead, I reached out to the one person I thought might help, a detective I'd had run-ins with over the years, a guy named Morrison who'd always told me I could flip if I wanted protection. I hated the idea of being a rat. Everything in me rebelled against it, but I was out of options. I met Morrison in a parking lot outside a diner in Ronkonkoma, and I told him I wanted to make a deal. He asked me what I had to offer, and I told him everything. Names, locations, operations, bodies. I gave him MS-13 on a silver platter, and in exchange, he got me into witness protection. The transition was surreal. One day, I was Alexi the Dropout Saenz, one of the most feared enforcers in MS-13. The next day, I was nobody, just another face in a witness protection program, living under a new name in a state I'd never even visited before. They set me up with a job at a warehouse, minimum wage, grunt work that made my shoulders ache and my pride burn. I was sharing an apartment with a federal agent who was supposed to keep me alive until the trial started. Everything I'd known, everyone I'd cared about, was gone. My parents wouldn't talk to me. They'd heard I'd turned informant, and to them, that was worse than being a killer. My brother sent me one message telling me I was dead to him. The friends I'd made in the gang, the brothers I'd bled with, were all hunting me now. I was completely alone. The trials took 2 years, say. I testified against 37 members of MS-13, including Smiley. I sat in courtrooms and recounted murders, assaults, extortion schemes, everything I'd witnessed and participated in over 5 years. The defense attorneys tried to tear me apart on the stand, calling me a liar, a coward, a traitor. They weren't wrong. I was all those things, but I was also the only one telling the truth. My testimony put most of them away for life. Smiley got 3 consecutive life sentences without parole. When the judge read the verdict, he looked right at me, and I saw it in his eyes. Not anger or betrayal, but disappointment. Like I'd let him down. Like I'd failed some test of loyalty that mattered more than all the blood we'd spilled. And maybe he was right. Maybe in the world we'd built, betrayal was the worst sin, worse than murder, worse than anything. But I couldn't carry that weight anymore. I just couldn't. Now I live in a small town in the Midwest, working construction under a name that isn't mine. I don't have friends. I don't date. I keep to myself and try not to think about Brentwood, about the streets I used to own, about the kid crying over his mother's body. But the memories don't fade. They're always there, lurking in the back of my mind, waiting for quiet moments to surface. I see their faces sometimes, the people I hurt, the people I killed. I hear that kid screaming. I feel the weight of the gun in my hand, the recoil, the finality of pulling a trigger. People think confessing is some kind of release, like saying the words out loud will wash away the guilt. It doesn't. Nothing does. I'll carry this until the day I die, which might come sooner than I think. MS-13 has a long memory, and I know there are people out there who'd pay good money to find me and finish what they started. I don't know if telling this story makes me brave or stupid, maybe both. But I wanted people to know how it happens, how a scared kid gets swallowed by a gang and turned into something unrecognizable. I wanted them to understand that Long Island isn't just beaches and suburbs, that places like Brentwood and Central Islip have their own wars, their own nightmares. I became one of those nightmares. I became the thing that parents warned their kids about, the monster lurking in the shadows. And the worst part is, I can't even say I regret all of it. Some part of me, the part that's still that terrified 14-year-old getting beaten in school hallways, is grateful for what MS-13 gave me. They made me strong. They made me matter. They made me somebody, even if that somebody was a monster, even if that somebody destroyed everything he touched. That's the truth nobody wants to hear, that sometimes the monster saves you before it destroys you, and by the time you realize what you've become, it's already too late to go back. The first year in witness protection was psychological warfare. Every car that slowed down near me, every stranger who looked twice, every knock on the door sent my heart racing. The federal agent assigned to me, a guy named Martinez, tried to tell me I was safe, that MS-13 wouldn't find me here in this nothing town in Kansas, where the biggest crime was shoplifting at Walmart. But he didn't understand. MS-13 isn't just a gang, it's a network that spans continents. They have people everywhere, in every city, every prison, every corner of this country and beyond. I'd seen them find people who'd been hiding for years, people who thought they were untouchable. They always found them, and when they did, they made examples. I knew my name was on a list somewhere, probably with a price attached to it. Sleep became impossible without pills, and even then, the nightmares came. I tried to build some kind of normal life, but normal felt like a costume that didn't fit. The guys at the construction site where I worked were decent enough, blue-collar types who talked about football and fishing and their kids' soccer games. I'd nod along, pretend to care, but their problems felt so small compared to the weight I carried. They complained about their mortgages while I was worried about getting my throat cut in a parking lot. One of them, a guy named Dale, kept trying to be friends, inviting me to barbecues and bowling nights. I always made excuses. Getting close to people meant putting them in danger, and I'd destroyed enough lives already. So I stayed isolated, ate dinner alone, spent weekends in my apartment watching TV and jumping at every sound. Martinez checked in once a week, always asking if I'd noticed anything suspicious. I always said no, but the truth was, everything felt suspicious. Paranoia had become my permanent state of being. The prosecutors kept pulling me back for additional testimony. Apparently, my cooperation had opened up whole new cases, connections between MS-13 and other criminal organizations that the feds had been trying to prove for years. They flew me back to New York under heavy security, put me up in safe houses, paraded me in front of grand juries. Each time I had to relive it all, recounting murders and beatings and executions in clinical detail while lawyers scribbled notes and jurors looked at me with mixture of horror and disgust. I was useful to them, a prize witness, but I knew they saw me as a monster too, just a monster they could control. After each session, they'd fly me back to Kansas and I'd try to forget, but the memories stuck like tar. I started drinking heavily, nothing crazy, just enough to dull the edges, to make sleep possible. Martinez noticed, but didn't say anything. What was he going to do, send me to rehab? I was already in prison, just one without bars. About 18 months in, I got a letter. It came to my apartment, addressed to my real name, Alexi Saenz. Not the fake name the feds had given me, my real name. I nearly threw up when I saw it. Martinez went ballistic when I showed him. Immediately called in a whole team to sweep my apartment and the building. They found nothing, no surveillance, no signs of how the letter had been delivered, but the message was clear. They knew where I was. MS-13 had found me. The letter itself was short, just 3 sentences in Spanish that translated to something like, "You can't hide forever. We don't forget. We don't forgive." No signature, no threats of specific violence. Just that cold promise hanging over my head. The feds wanted to move me immediately, relocate me to another state, another identity. But what was the point? If they'd found me once, they'd find me again. Running was just delaying the inevitable. I refused the relocation. Martinez thought I'd lost my mind, said I was being suicidal, but I was just tired of running. If MS-13 wanted me dead, they'd get me eventually whether I was in Kansas or Alaska or fucking Siberia. At least here, I had a routine, a job, something resembling a life. I just started being more careful. I varied my routes to work, never went to the same restaurant twice in a row, always sat with my back to the wall. I bought a gun illegally, a Glock 19 that I kept on me at all times. If they came for me, I wasn't going down without a fight. Martinez warned me that carrying was a violation of my protection agreement, that I could lose federal support. I told him federal support hadn't stopped that letter from reaching my door. After that, he stopped lecturing me. I think he understood that I was already dead, just waiting for the execution date. The paranoia started affecting my work. I'd lose focus, spend hours staring at the same wall, trying to figure out if that car I'd seen that morning had been following me. My boss pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay at home, if I needed time off. I told him I was fine, just dealing with some personal stuff. But I wasn't fine. I was unraveling, thread by thread. I stopped going to the grocery store, started ordering everything online. I stopped getting my hair cut. I let my beard grow out. I wanted to be unrecognizable, wanted to disappear into anonymity. But every time I looked in the mirror, I saw Alexi the Dropout Saenz staring back at me, covered in ink and scars, a walking testament to a life I couldn't escape. The tattoos were the worst. I'd gotten them lasered off partially, the most obvious MS-13 markings, but the process was expensive and painful and never fully worked. The ghost of who I'd been was still visible on my skin. 6 months after the letter, I saw him. I was leaving work heading to my car in the parking lot when I spotted a guy leaning against a pickup truck about 50 yards away. He was young, maybe early 20s, wearing a Dodgers cap and a black hoodie despite the heat. But it was his stance that caught my attention. That particular way MS-13 guys carry themselves, loose but ready, like coiled snakes. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw the recognition flash across his face. He knew who I was. I didn't run. I walked calmly to my car, keeping my hand on the Glock in my waistband. I watched him in my mirrors as I drove away, and he didn't follow. He just stood there watching me leave. That night, I called Martinez and told him what happened. He asked if I was sure, if maybe I was just seeing threats that weren't there. But I was sure. That kid had been sent to confirm I was still here, to verify the target. They weren't ready to move yet, but they would be soon. Martinez managed to get surveillance on my apartment and workplace. Unmarked cars doing periodic sweeps. It helped a little, knowing the feds were paying attention, but it also made everything feel more real. I was a marked man under protective watch, waiting for the hammer to drop. Work became unbearable. I'd catch myself scanning faces, looking for that kid in the Dodgers cap or anyone else who seemed out of place. My coworkers started avoiding me, probably thought I was on drugs or losing my mind. Maybe they were right. I stopped eating regularly, lost weight, looked gaunt and hollow in the mirror. Dale, the guy who'd tried to befriend me, asked one more time if I needed help. I almost told him everything, almost unburdened the whole nightmare onto this decent man who'd only tried to show me kindness. But I didn't. Instead, I told him I was fine and to mind his own business. I saw the hurt in his eyes, but it was better that way. Better he stayed far away from the disaster my life had become. 3 months later, they came. I was walking back to my apartment around midnight after a late shift. The street was empty. Just parked cars and streetlights casting orange pools on the pavement. I had my keys in one hand and my other hand on the Glock. I never saw them coming. They hit me from behind. 3 of them, moving fat and silent. I went down hard, my head bouncing off the sidewalk. I tried to reach for my gun, but someone stomped on my wrist, grinding it into the concrete until I heard something crack. Then they were on me, kicking and punching, and through the pain, I heard them speaking Spanish, heard the familiar cadence of MS-13. I tried to fight back, but there were too many of them, and I was disoriented. One of them pulled out a knife, a big hunting blade that gleamed under the streetlights. This was it. This was how it ended. I closed my eyes and waited for the blade to find my throat, but then I heard shouting, saw flashlights, and suddenly my attackers scattered. The surveillance team had seen the attack and moved in. They'd save my life for now. I spent 3 days in the hospital with broken ribs, a fractured wrist, a concussion, and more bruises than I could count. The feds posted guards outside my room, and Martinez visited daily, his face grave. He told me they'd arrested 2 of the attackers, young MS-13 members who'd been imported from El Salvador specifically for this hit. The third one got away. During interrogation, one of them admitted they'd been paid $5,000 to kill me, that the contract had been out there for over a year. Martinez said this was it. I had to relocate now, had to disappear for real. He had a place lined up in Oregon, deep in the rural mountains where nobody would find me. I was going to refuse again. But lying in that hospital bed, feeling every breath as a sharp pain in my chest, I realized something. I didn't want to die. Not like this, not beaten down in some Kansas parking lot like a dog. I'd spent so many years not caring whether I lived or died, but suddenly I cared. I wanted more time, even if that time was spent hiding and alone. So I agreed to the move. Oregon was as isolated as Martinez had promised. They set me up in a cabin outside a town so small it didn't have a stoplight, just a general store and a gas station and nothing else for 30 miles. The nearest neighbors were a retired couple who kept to themselves. My new job was working at a lumber mill, hard physical labor that left me exhausted and sore but too tired to think. The feds had given me another new identity, another fabricated history. I was supposed to be a divorcee from Montana with no kids and no ties. The story was thin, but nobody asked questions. People out here minded their own business. I grew my hair out, grew a full beard, started wearing glasses I didn't need. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Maybe that was the point. Maybe I needed to kill Alexi Saenz completely to have any chance at survival. The isolation was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, I felt safer than I had in years. MS-13's reach was vast, but it had limits, and this forgotten corner of Oregon seemed beyond their radar. On the other hand, the loneliness was crushing. I'd gone from having dozens of brothers, a whole organization that functioned as family, to having absolutely no one. I talked to Martinez on encrypted calls once a month. But those conversations were brief and clinical, just check-ins to confirm I was still alive. I had no friends, no family, no connections to anyone. I worked, I came home, I ate dinner alone, I went to bed. Day after day, month after month, the same routine. Sometimes I'd sit on my porch at night, looking up at stars I'd never seen in Long Island, and I'd wonder if this was really living or just a different kind of death. At least in Brentwood, surrounded by violence and chaos, I'd felt alive. Out here, I just felt like a ghost. The guilt hit me hardest in the quiet moments, when there was nothing to distract me, no work to focus on, no immediate threat to worry about. The memories would flood in. I'd see their faces, all the people I'd hurt over the years. The kid crying over his dead mother, the rival gang members we'd executed, the shopkeepers we'd extorted, the families we'd destroyed. I'd told myself for so long that it was just business, just survival, just the game. But out here, with nothing but silence and time, I couldn't hide from the truth. I'd been a monster. I'd chosen to be a monster, and no amount of cooperation with the feds or years spent hiding could change that. Some nights I'd drink until I passed out, anything to stop the thoughts. Other nights, I'd just sit there and let the guilt wash over me, let it drown me, because maybe that's what I deserved. Maybe this lonely existence was my penance, and it still wasn't enough. 2 years into the Oregon isolation, something unexpected happened. I met someone. Her name was Sarah, a woman about my age who worked at the general store in town. She was kind, quiet, with sad eyes that suggested she had her own history of pain. We'd exchange small talk when I came in for supplies. Nothing deep, just comments about the weather or local news. But slowly, over months, those conversations got longer. She started asking about my life, and I'd feed her the cover story the feds had given me. She'd share bits of her own past, a bad marriage, a kid she'd lost custody of, a string of bad decisions that had led her here. We were both running from something, and maybe that's why we gravitated toward each other. Eventually, she invited me to dinner, and I said yes, even though every instinct told me to keep my distance. That dinner led to more dinners, and before I knew it, I was in a relationship for the first time since I'd been a teenager. It felt surreal, playing at being normal, pretending I was just a regular guy with a regular life. Sarah made the isolation bearable. Having someone to talk to, someone who seemed to actually care, gave me something I hadn't had in years: hope. We'd spend evenings together, watching movies, cooking meals, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. She never pushed me about my past, seemed to understand that there were doors I needed to keep closed. I wanted to tell her the truth, wanted to unburden myself of all the secrets and lies, but I knew that would be the end of it. Nobody could love Alexi Saenz, the MS-13 enforcer with blood on his hands. They could only love this fake person I was pretending to be. So I kept lying, kept playing the role, and tried to ignore the voice in my head that said I was just setting us both up for more pain. For a while, it almost worked. For a while, I almost believed I could have a normal life. But the past doesn't stay buried forever. It always finds a way to surface. The end came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was at Sarah's place having spent the night when Martinez called. He never called outside our scheduled monthly check-ins unless something was wrong. When I answered, his voice was urgent. They'd intercepted intelligence that MS-13 had renewed their search for me, that they'd put out new feelers with my description and information about possible locations. Oregon was on their list. Martinez said I needed to move again, immediately, that they'd have someone there within hours to extract me. I felt everything collapse. I looked at Sarah, still sleeping peacefully, and I knew this was it. I couldn't bring her into this nightmare, couldn't put her at risk. I wrote her a note, something vague about a family emergency, about how I had to leave and might not be back. It was cruel and cowardly, but it was also the kindest thing I could do. I left the note on her kitchen table, grabbed my few belongings, and walked out of the closest thing to happiness I'd had in a decade. They moved me to Vermont this time, another isolated location, another new identity. But something had broken in me. I couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep running and hiding and pretending. I was tired, bone-deep tired, of living in fear. I started thinking about alternatives, about ways to end this that didn't involve waiting for MS-13 to find me. I could disappear completely, go off the grid where even the feds couldn't track me. I could confront my past directly. Maybe reach out to someone in the gang and try to negotiate. Or I could just end it myself, take control of the one decision I had left. These thoughts circled in my head day after day, darker and more persistent. Martinez noticed during our calls that something had changed, tried to get me to talk to a therapist. But how do you explain to a therapist that you're haunted by the ghosts of people you murdered? How do you process guilt that has no absolution? That's where I am now, sitting in another anonymous apartment in another anonymous town, wondering if this is all that's left. I'm 32 years old and I feel ancient, used up, hollowed out. The kid I was at 14, scared and desperate for belonging, seems like a different person entirely. The monster I became, the enforcer who inspired fear across Long Island, is gone too. What's left is this: a man caught between identities, belonging nowhere, wanted by criminals and barely tolerated by law enforcement. I don't know how this story ends. Maybe MS-13 finds me and finishes what they started. Maybe I spend the rest of my life moving from town to town, always looking over my shoulder. Maybe I find a way to make peace with what I've done, though I can't imagine what that would look like. All I know is that I survived, which is more than most people in my position can say. But sometimes, in the darkest hours, I wonder if survival is really enough. If living like this, in this perpetual state of fear and isolation, is really better than the alternative. I don't have an answer. I just have today, and then tomorrow, and then the day after that. And I'll keep going until I can't anymore. That's all any of us can do. That's all I have left.